So thank you very much for agreeing to chat about the social impact of traditional music in North Kintyre and how you might have found it. So I just wanted to ask you initially about where you might have come across traditional music or Scottish music in particular, and I appreciate that, Tony, you're originally from Wales, so that's going to be a different experience.
Yeah, I suppose the first time I actually encountered anything like it, I was at a holiday camp in North Wales. There was all sorts of talent things going on, and there was a young, she would have been a young girl, probably teenager maximum. But yeah, she got up and she did some Highland dancing, so that was really my first experience of that. And yeah. Something completely different for me.
Right, of course.
Music-wise, probably when I was working at the school in Campbelltown, and there was the pipe band practice there twice a week. Yeah, really not knowing anything about the music, it's surprising how quickly you find yourself tapping one foot and just really getting into it. So,
brilliant.
Good stuff. My experience is obviously very different, Muriel. So we always grew up with music about the house. Yep. And Scottish traditional music was definitely a part of that. Including my brothers used to dress up with it. You remember you used to get the kilts with the vest bit attached? And my brothers would put them on and do their Highland dancing and their Ceilidh dances up and down, Gay Gordons up and down the living room. So we always did it. Always had traditional music at Christmas and New Year and Easter and family parties and stuff. So it's always been there. And then the other part of it is, for me, was a lot of exposure at uni. So when I was at Glasgow Uni, there was a lot of Ceilidhs and a lot of dancing and stuff like that. And then in recent, all our weddings are all kind of Ceilidh focused as well. So it tends to be that type of traditional music that's
so when you were younger, can you think what singers or what bands might have been? Can you remember anything?
Very much just what was on the radio. So it would be Radio Scotland turned on, and that's it. And then the usual Friday night or Saturday night thingamajig and all that type of thing. So it was whatever was on.
Take the floor.
Take the floor. That was exactly what we were exposed to, kind of grew up with. Nothing in particular. But yeah, it's always just kind of been there. But to be honest, the actual focus in terms of being more hands-on involved in playing and participating didn't come about until Tarbert, until we moved here.
So you didn't play any instruments, but were there particular songs that your family might have?
Just the usual big hits, like Mary's Wedding, and the other big one was, do you remember the wee boy, Stuart Anderson? My brothers loved Stuart Anderson's. Yeah. So it was very much that very traditional folksy side of it. Always played instruments though. I mean, I always played guitar, but it wasn't traditional. It was more pop type stuff. So it wasn't until we actually moved to Tarbert that came together for us and became that kind of clashing of those two worlds, if you like, and it's become such a thing. And I think culturally there's been such a big change as well, because things like Celtic Connections didn't exist when we were growing up, so that exposure to it didn't exist, whereas now I couldn't imagine our lives without that type of music being part of it. It's just so strange how these things have evolved over the years.
Yeah, and you've been to quite a few Celtic Connections nights?
Yep, we have. We like the late night sessions and the Drygate sessions and things like that, but we've been to different ones in some of the big venues. I think probably one of our more unusual ones was Ricky Ross in Queen's Cross Church. Is that what it is? Queen's Cross Church?
Yes.
So we've had some great Celtic Connections experiences, definitely.
And that then set you up, because how did you hear about the Fèis, or how did you get into the Clarsach? What was the sort of hook? We
weren't involved at the very early stages of you guys setting up the Fèis and launching it. Kind of watched it evolve just because I worked on the same floor as Alison, so knew there was something going along. And we did come along to the very first launch event. You were also involved at the school.
I was the school Janny at the time, so obviously when the instruments became available, there was a lot of collaboration with the school and the Fèis at the time. and working out what we were going to do with instruments, because the school didn't have anything.
Can you just remember how that came about? Was the instruments were at the village hall? Do you remember this?
The instruments were at the village hall, yeah. I can't quite remember I can't remember if I carried them along or there was a collaboration with people carrying them along. I can't.
It was the village hall committee, maybe?
It could have been, yeah.
Yeah. Brought them to the school.
I think I just picked them up from the front door and ferried them to various storage cupboards to try and make space for them.
Yeah.
Tried to get some sort of a stock.
Yeah.
Still don't know how many there are, but that's another story completely.
I have got a stock sheet, Tony. I just want to mention that. But
I do remember our school technician at the time started to do a stock, and I do remember her saying, "How do I tell the difference between a violin and a fiddle?" She's not very musical.
Yeah. So yes, you came to the very first one that had a couple of tutors from Manran and some George Campbell Hay poems at it. Yeah, that Ewan did, and so then you must have heard Ali talking about it more, or?
So it was before we had come along to some of the early Fèis and took part when you started to introduce the adult lessons, and took part and just loved it and fell in love with the community aspect of it. And I remember Alison telling us that they were hoping to start up a Clarsach for adults, because that wasn't one of the first ones.
That's correct.
And she said, we're going to try it out. Is that something you'd be interested in? I'm like, really? It almost felt like, would you mind if I came along and tried it? Because Clarsach seemed like such a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is.
Well, of course. And I remember going along to the library for that first lesson and seeing a Clarsach for the first time and actually sitting down and touching it and actually just touching the strings and oh my gosh. And I think certainly I fell in love with it right away. Mm-hmm. And that was it. I knew that I was going to learn to be able to get some kind of tune out of this. And yet we've never looked back since then. So yeah, and if we hadn't had the Fèis opportunity, then that just wouldn't exist for anyone.
Because you've really taken that on and it's become more of its own entity.
Yep. I certainly still see it as part of the Fèis family.
Oh, definitely.
So that's absolutely where it's come from. But it has kind of evolved into its own standalone opportunity. So prior to COVID, we were having our monthly classes in Tarbert Library. It's grown so popular that we were having a beginners session and an intermediate session for those of us who have now been playing for 4 years. I don't know how it's come about that we've been playing for 4 years, but we've been obviously, just evolving over time and gone from what were real beginners with no knowledge to now being able to play a reasonable amount of tunes, which is just fantastic. And Lissy's such a great and patient teacher. And obviously during the pandemic, it's been particularly challenging because we haven't been able to meet face to face. And for me, one of the big things about music in general and Clarsach in particular is that while you're playing it, you can't think of anything else. You have to focus on what you're doing. So in terms of the mental health side of it, it's a really good thing to do. And I was a bit concerned that people weren't having that opportunity. So we decided to try fortnightly Zoom sessions. And we've been doing them now for probably about 6 months. And they're not as great as meeting up in person, but they're going okay. And we've expanded now so much that we're looking at introducing another beginner session, which would be 3 lots of classes. And separately to that, Lissy has secured funding through the Argyll branch of the Clarsach Society to pay for more instruments. And all of that came from the roots in the Fèis. So we've got to the stage now where we're a bit of an organisation or a class that brackets over 2 areas. We're very much founded in the Fèis, but we've also got a bit more of a membership in terms of the Argyll branch of the Clarsach Society, and some people now who are taking part in the Clarsach classes who didn't know that it had come from Fèis. So it's important for us to make sure that people understand the links there. Yes. And that's why we did things like just before lockdown, we did the Coffee and Clarsach as part of our fundraising for the Fèis. It was a good opportunity for us to show what we've learned over the years, but a good way to keep the links with where it started.